Welcome everyone to the RadioActive.
Issei, I think you're muted. Do you see a button on the bottom left corner? Yeah.
Is it this one?
Yeah.
You can hear me?
You did it.
Oh, okay. Anyways, welcome everyone to the RadioActive's 2020 Advanced Producers Listening Party. Morgan, you still there?
Yeah, sorry.
Welcome everyone to the RadioActive's 2020 Advanced Producers Listening Party. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Issei Palos, and I'll be one of your MCs today.
My name is Morgan White, and I will be your other MC today. And I am super excited to show you what we have created. Through the trials and tribulations, RadioActive's leadership teams have met almost every Saturday since January, working on our radio journalism and podcasting skills.
Wow, this journey of making podcasts and feature stories took 5 months of hard work and dedication, and we have done so much in that time. From brainstorming, pitching, and hosting interviews, writing scripts, and so much more, we have really learned what it takes to be a true journalist.
As you all know, the coronavirus changed most of the way we conduct our lives. The transition to virtual workshop had its complications. And although communications became harder and more stressful, our dedicated mentors and peers continued to work tirelessly to create the media we passionately crafted. The Zoom calls weren't always seamless. The occasional glitches and technical difficulties were abundant. RadioActive adapted to these barriers, and we finished scripts, voicing, and editing, all from a safe distance from our homes and cars.
Even though the pandemic has changed the way we do most things, we still kept a lot of our little traditions and activities that made it worthwhile. Morgan, what is one of your favorite memories in the RadioActive workshop?
To be honest, it's not the traditions that were done in the past, it's the new ones, I think, like signing on to your Zoom call, getting the password. It's just kind of a new experience, and I always looked forward to it in the morning. What about you, Issei?
Well, I think for me, the most memorable part is, although we can't see our peers every day and in person, we still managed to hop on Zoom and really just talk about our day. I still miss having in-person interactions though, with all of you guys, but I think this really showed us how passionate and dedicated that we all are about our work. So, pat on the back to all of our RadioActive peers.
We have so many amazing stories to show you today. We have feature stories, we have podcasts, we have a Q&A, and we have TikTok videos.
TikTok, for real. Ooh, you guys are in for a treat. We have so much more to show you guys, but we just want to say, although we wish we can meet you all in person, we are so thankful for everyone who decided to tune in and listen to our work. From RadioActive to everyone here, thank you.
Next up, we will have RadioActive's program manager, Leela Lakehart.
Thanks, Morgan. Thanks, Issei. Hey, everyone. I am RadioActive's program manager, Leela Lakehart, and I want to welcome you to our first ever online listening party. Although we're not all physically in the same place, I want to acknowledge that I and the KOW station sit on the unceded ancestral lands of the Duwamish people, a people that are still here, continuing to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. Today, as we celebrate the young people in our community, we're in the midst of a really painful time. Many are experiencing hardship right now. And this week, we witnessed the horrific killing of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police and a racist system. His life matters and should not have been cut short. Please join me in a moment of silence to acknowledge George Floyd's life and unjust death. Thank you. We are grateful during this time to be able to continue to support Youth Voice and highlight the work of the amazing young people in our program. Thank you to everyone for being with us today and being a part of this. RadioActive Youth Media has been around since 2003. We started when some high school students came to KUOW one summer and said they wanted to hang out and learn how radio gets made. RadioActive is a place where young people discover what public radio journalism is all about and learn the skills to make their own stories and podcasts for KUOW. Young people's voices and perspectives aren't heard enough in media. We want to help create a world where youth voice is expected and respected. RadioActive Youth Media offers programs throughout the year. Intro workshops where teens get paid to learn audio production basics and produce their first stories. Advanced programs like this one for intro workshop graduates who want to keep building skills and making radio with us. And free community workshops partnering with schools and youth-serving organizations. In all of these programs, young people create content that you'll hear on KUOW.org and 94.9 FM. Listen to more youth-produced stories and podcasts like the ones you'll hear today on our website, kuow.org/radioactive. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Our podcast is on YouTube now too. You're already there. And we would love it if you'd rate and review our show and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It really helps. Find us on social media for more great content. Some of you might already be fans. I hope you are. You can find us at KUOW RadioActive on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and thanks to the participants of this workshop, TikTok. It takes so many people to make a program like this happen. Our program lead is Mary Heisey, who also mentored one of the podcast teams this spring. Kendra Hanna was our second podcast mentor, and Kyle Norris and Sonia Harris mentored the news team. Thanks to our feature story editors, Marcy Silman, Anna Boyko-Wyrock, and Isolda Raftery. Our podcast editors were Kelsey Kupferer, who led our tech team for this event as well, and me. Christina Schuer is our web editor. This workshop was also supported by KUOW's news director, Jill Jackson, RadioActive office assistant, Melissa Takai, KUOW's stellar tech team for helping us to make this program accessible online, and everyone on staff at KUOW for supporting the work we do. I want to give a special shout out to the parents and families of our participants. Your support helped make this workshop a success. And to all the RadioActive graduates in the virtual room, thank you for being a part of our community. The biggest source of support for KUOW and RadioActive is listeners and community members like you. We want to give special thanks this year to Bobby and John Bridge, the City of Seattle, Chris and John Ensline, Kelly Evans and Manish Batra, Gretel Galgone, Moccasin Lake Foundation, Nessholm Family Foundation, Oak Creek Foundation, Real Networks Foundation, Robert Chin Foundation, Royal Little Family Foundation, Katie and Scott Rensler, the Society of Professional Journalists Foundation, Margaret Taylor and Robert Elliott, and the Windermere Foundation. So today you're going to hear work from our Advanced Producers Workshop. We had 2 tracks this spring in our workshop. Our news team strengthened their skills in producing feature radio stories and learned new skills in the production of short on-air spots. Our podcast team explored creative audio storytelling and deepened their podcast production skills. In the last 4 months, these 12 young people have produced 6 feature stories, 2 podcasts, and 4 creative audio stories, all during one wild pandemic. One small bit of housekeeping before we get to the main program. We want RadioActive to remain a safe space for young people, and that includes this online event. We really thank you for participating in this program via the comments on this video, and we ask you to remember that this is a youth-friendly space. Harmful or offensive comments will not be tolerated. Thank you for helping us to maintain a safe space for our community. This year's Advanced Producer Workshop has been exceptional for many reasons. The young people you'll meet today have shown incredible passion and grit. Not only did they come back after our intro program hungry to learn and do more, but they stuck with it when things got really tough this spring. When we learned that we could no longer meet in person, they all said they wanted to keep going. They worked through a lot of new and unusual challenges together, and through it all, they made incredible media that made us laugh, helped us learn, and gave us all the feels. They're amazing journalists and leaders in our community, and I'm so excited to celebrate them with you today. Thank you. Now let's do some listening.
Now it's time to listen to feature stories from our news team members.
You can hear features on our website, kuow.org/radioactive.
We'll play each story, then we'll do a Q&A with the full group of youth producers. Add your questions for the youth producers to the live chat as you listen.
Let's hear some radio magic.
The first story we'll hear is from Lila Schroff, who takes us to the Kitsap County Girls Court.
Over the past 2 decades, while juvenile incarceration rates have been decreasing, rates of incarcerated girls have either stayed the same or increased. In response, the Kitsap County Girls Court opened in June of 2019. It's the state's first court system providing service just for girls. RadioActive's Lila Schroff has more.
All rise, court still in session.
I'm sitting in a small courtroom in Kitsap County, but despite the judicial setting, the atmosphere is light. People are chatty, greeting one another with hugs and laughter, and a snack cart sits by the door. This is the Kitsap County Girls Court.
After having a bad day or something, knowing that I'm going to girls' court kind of put me in a better mood.
That's 16-year-old Hannah Rayfield. She's one of just over 20 girls who the program has touched since opening last year.
You don't feel like somebody who's on probation. You feel like someone who is part of a family.
After youth like Hannah are charged and convicted with a crime, they often serve a period of probation. This means that they can remain in their communities, but under court supervision. At Girls Court, the probation experience is different. Rachel Sotley, the CEO of the Center for Children's Youth and Justice, or CCYJ, explained it to me.
It recognizes the needs of girls are very different than the needs of boys. Girls have greater mental health and medical needs and trauma indicators. And when their needs go unmet, they are at higher risk for recidivating over and over again.
Recidivating is the process of relapsing back into the justice system after an initial encounter. And for girls whose needs go unmet, it can become a huge issue. To address this, the Girls Court operates with a trauma-informed approach. This means understanding the root of the complex issues that land these girls in the justice system in the first place.
What is underneath all of this trauma and all of these adverse childhood experiences is love and be loved and know and be known in the absence of community, and that this community doesn't want that young person to miss out. That is extraordinary.
From group tie-dye projects to volunteering, Girls Court also emphasizes the importance of building relationships with local communities and each other. And the good news is, it seems to be working. Girls Court graduate Hannah Rayfield says the experience doesn't fit one's typical idea of the courtroom.
I see the person that's name being called perk up, and it goes up there with a huge smile, and then the judge just like, so how was your weekend? Highs and lows. And then I know when I'm sitting there and I get my name called, my heart dropped with excitement.
When things were tough financially, Hannah would use her own money to pay for bus fares to get to Girls Court. And she also told me something that's pretty rare for people involved in the justice system.
My probation officer, she was like a family member to me and everything. Oh, I miss her so much.
The president of CCYJ, Rachel Sotley, also witnessed the impact of the Girls Court. She described to me an interaction with a graduating member reflecting on her experience.
She said, for the first time in my life, I'm confident with who I am. And I've been able to develop trusting relationships that I've never been able to develop in my life. And I have a community that cares about me. And I'm sitting there going, the youth legal justice system just produced an outcome where a young person, high risk, very complex, multi-system impacted, left feeling confident and connected and trusting of others. That's magical.
Oh, no. So that was close to home, right?
Everyone I spoke to, from Rachel to Hannah to the girls' court team, voiced hope that someday this model would be expanded across the state or nation, or even to include a boys' court. After all, every youth should have the chance to pursue their dreams. For RadioActive, I'm Lila Schroff. All in-person interviews were conducted prior to the stay-at-home order.
Wow, that was incredible. Thank you, Lila, for that. Our next story is from Meghana Kakubal, who talked to a special education teacher about how learning continues in the midst of the pandemic.
On April 6th, Governor Inslee announced that school buildings will be closed for the rest of the academic year.
All public and private K-12 schools in our state, they'll be stopped from providing traditional in-person instruction through the end of this school year in June.
In Mercer Island School District, classes resumed online for most students on April 13th. But for some, that won't be enough. RadioActive's Meghana Kakubal has more.
When the closure first began in early March, everyone faced uncertainty. For me, a Mercer Island High School senior, my concern was graduating on time. I wasn't worried about my learning, because I knew for me it would continue online. It isn't ideal, but it will work. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for all the students in my school. Christine Kenyon is a special education teacher there.
Students who might be placed in a classroom like mine might have multiple disabilities, some might have genetic disorders, some might have Down syndrome or autism, some might be nonverbal learners, fine motor and gross motor skills might be different than their peers.
Miss Kenyon's students have very different needs and methods for learning than I do. Their typical day is not a strictly structured 7-period schedule with assignments and exams. I visited Miss Kenyon's classroom earlier this spring, and students were working on life skills, like counting change and operating technology.
Hi.
Hi, William. How are you?
What's your name?
I'm Sarah.
You're Sarah?
Yeah.
They also work on these skills outside of the classroom.
So we get to ride the bus and go to McDonald's and have social time and practice how to be in the community. So interacting with cashiers, using our money, all the things that are expected in the community. And then our 5th period class goes to the grocery store, so they get to practice their shopping skills.
The school closure forced these activities to stop.
I actually had some tears that morning because I knew that it would be the last time I would be seeing my students for a while, and I didn't know what it looked like past that point, and that made me feel really, really sad. And I felt sad for them because I knew how much they loved coming to school, and I felt like we were suffering a considerable loss.
In the initial weeks after the closure, Mercer Island School District administrators asked teachers to focus on social and emotional connections with their students. My general education English teacher and I had several email exchanges. For Miss Kenyon, that meant creating 9 individualized learning plans to support her students and families at home. But moving forward, Miss Kenyon wonders how she can be an effective teacher for her students with individualized needs.
Each kid will be different. I've got some kids who are eager to learn and have some parents or caregivers who are ready for the challenge, and I have some kids whose families are not going to be okay with that.
During his April 6th press conference, Governor Jay Inslee briefly acknowledged the issue.
We know closing schools also presents challenges in the need for equity in education. Students with disabilities and other vulnerable students, we know this is a challenging time for their learning. So we are addressing this by allowing limited school activity for those students in school buildings that really follow social distancing guidelines.
How and when exactly this will happen are still big questions. Miss Kenyon remains hopeful. In any case, there's no good way to replace trips to the grocery store and face-to-face interactions common in the classroom. Miss Kenyon says this inadequacy cannot be ignored.
It's a civil rights issue, and it is important for all children in the United States to be given a free and appropriate public education. And I know how hard people with disabilities have had to work to gain recognition in the workforce, recognition in schools, safety, being able to even get into buildings. And once they've received that protection, there is no way we should be taking that back at this time just because of a pandemic. I don't care. It's really important for the public to keep that in mind and to be generous at heart.
In the meantime, Miss Kenyon's going to support her students as best as she can virtually. For RadioActive, this is Meghana Kakubal.
Wow. My neighbor is actually a special education teacher, and every Wednesday you can hear her on her lawn doing her exercises with her students virtually. Our next story may not be appropriate for all listeners. RadioActive's J. Dean Radak Kabahug looks into child sex trafficking in King County.
This next story might not be appropriate for all listeners. On a single day in King County, more than 1,000 children under the age of 18 are sex trafficked. That's according to one local source. And the dangers of getting forced into online sex trafficking are something that everyday teenagers are warning each other about online. RadioActive's Jadine Radak Kabahug has more.
As I'm scrolling through TikTok, I see some trending dances, memes, and then I stumble across this.
PSA about sex trafficking in my area, north of Seattle.
It's a homemade video from a teen in Seattle. Teens are sharing posts like this to make sure other teens don't become a victim of sex trafficking. The photos and videos are spreading like wildfire online, with tens of thousands of retweets, likes, and shares. One of the most common posts is about zip ties on cars. It has photos of zip ties attached to side view mirrors and windshield wipers. The caption reads, "If you see this on your vehicle, leave immediately. Traffickers are doing this to distract and kidnap you, but this is not true."
That absolutely is not an accurate portrayal of sex trafficking.
Audrey Badke is a programs manager at the Seattle organization REST. It stands for Real Escape from the Sex Trade. She told me the reality is way different than what's being posted online.
When we look at individuals that have experienced trafficking, the majority of times they are recruited by somebody who builds trust with them. It rarely is a stranger on the street that comes and grabs an individual and puts them into the sex trafficking ring.
While things like that do happen, Badke says most of the time it starts with the victim meeting a man
and him becoming my boyfriend, becoming somebody that I trust, somebody that I love, somebody that I want to be with and please.
And this is what happened, verbatim, to someone else I talked to. She's a former sex trafficking survivor, now in her early 40s. We're not saying her name to protect her. At a young age, she was sexually abused by a family member, then taken from her parents and put into foster care.
Shortly after, I ended up meeting a pimp out there on 3rd Avenue in Pike, and that's how it all started.
At the time, she felt abandoned, like her parents didn't want her. She got into the pimp's car, and he took her to lunch and shopping.
He got to know me and my backstory, my life, and created a story, a fairy tale story of, oh, it's going to be me and you against the world, and we're going to make so much money, and basically sold me on a dream of love and belonging.
But instead, within 2 weeks, she was on Pacific Highway and Aurora Avenue, being forced to have sex for money. That's known as being sex trafficked, and the survivor calls it being raped. She says she was lied to and used for the next 7 years, and it ended when the FBI arrested her. She got out of the life, as it's known. She now has a regular job. The survivor is actively working with a therapist and healing. I was surprised by her story. It happened over many years versus being instantly thrown into a van. The expert I talked to earlier, Audrey Badke, also says those online posts I saw could do real damage to teens because they're not true.
For example, if you are concerned about predators following you in a store, you won't worry about the people that you let into your life on social media.
She says if you're watching for victims with duct tape on their mouths, you won't notice the silent pleas of help from friends, classmates, or loved ones. Another thing I learned was people at risk for being sex trafficked are foster kids and people of color. Both are true for our former survivor. The reality of sex trafficking is so different from the social media warning posts that teens share. Instead, the world of pimps, buyers, and victims is a lot more quiet and hidden in plain sight. For RadioActive, Jadine Radak Kabahug.
Wow. That story is a lot to unpack. So thank you, Jadine, for making such a powerful story and handling it with so much sensitivity and professionalism. Next, we hear from Hong Ta, who takes us to a new natural gas plant in Tacoma.
COVID-19 is putting yet another thing on hold, a long simmering battle at the port of Tacoma. At stake, land sacred to the Puyallup tribe. RadioActive's Hong Ta reports.
Right now, Puget Sound Energy is putting the finishing touches on its new natural gas plant. It was named an essential business under the state's stay-home order. Eventually, the utility company expects the plant will process gas into fuel for cargo ships and other local customers. I took a trip to see the plant for myself. And I'm walking along a fence that says no trespassing. It's a pretty busy road that I'm walking on. The Tacoma LNG plant, you can see it, you can't miss it. It's a huge big cylinder that's lighted up, and there's cranes all around it. Construction was clearly happening. The facility is as tall as the Tacoma Dome, and its footprint will span 22 football fields.
Switching to LNG to fuel cargo ships is good for Tacoma's air and water.
In ad after ad, PSC claims the natural gas in the plant will be a cleaner alternative than the fuel cargo ships at the Port of Tacoma use now. However, according to the International Council on Clean Transportation, LNG could actually increase greenhouse gas emissions if methane slips during its supply chain.
With clean LNG, we can have a cleaner environment and more local jobs now.
But last December, the Puyallup tribe and environmental organizations filed legal challenges to stop construction. The groups say the site of the natural gas plant is too close to Puyallup land. Annette Bryan is a tribe council member and one of the leaders of the opposition. She has her master's in civil and environmental engineering. I met her back in September 2019 when she was on stage speaking in front of 600 people at the Tacoma climate strike.
My heart is full today. There is a sense of urgency that Mother Earth needs us to be here for her on her behalf.
In the beginning of March, I sat down with her. She told me the tribe has relied on the Tacoma Tide Flats land throughout their history.
It's our ancestral tide lands. It's where we get our subsistence foods, shellfish, geoduck, salmon, sea cucumbers, crabs.
Bryan says the land is culturally significant too.
They're where our ancestors are buried, so there's cultural artifacts and remains in those areas.
Now, the Port of Tacoma and Puget Sound Energy say they have the legal right to build on this land. But Councilmember Bryan says that's not the point.
It doesn't mean that they can come in a place that's so sacred to us and build something and say, oh, well, we own the land, so it's okay for us to destroy your habitat further.
On top of that, the tribe has a treaty with the federal government, going back to the 1850s. That treaty guarantees the tribe's access to traditional hunting and fishing grounds. So the Puyallup tribe says the plant may put their treaty rights in jeopardy. They argue the plant will pollute the air and harm the health of their members. Environmentalists share these concerns. Anna Doty is with the Washington Environmental Council. They are calling for a closer look on the effects of the project.
We don't understand all of the implications for public health and safety, and we don't know the true climate impacts of this project. And it's simply unacceptable to move forward a major new fossil fuel facility without comprehensive evaluation of those impacts.
Both Puget Sound Energy and the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency declined several requests for an interview. In an emailed statement, they say they can't comment on pending legal action. The case is now in Thurston County Superior Court. Due to COVID-19, the parties can't get a hearing until July. So until then, they wait. In Tacoma for KUOW Radioactive, I'm Home That.
That is amazing. And Hong traveled to Tacoma for this story. What a brilliant journalist. Now we'll hear from Ritika Managuli, who brings us a story about gender and fashion.
Nice. I'm gonna have you guys do that one more time with your wows because I wasn't recording yet on your first wow. Sorry.
Okay. No, it's okay. I'm worried I'm gonna stutter the next time.
And it might have been fine. We'll just try one more time. So until then, they wait. For Radioactive in Tacoma, I'm Hong Ta.
Wow. Hong, excellent journalist. She travels to Tacoma. Beautiful story. Now we'll hear from Ratika Managuli, who brings us a story about gender and fashion.
For the first time in U.S. history, the country saw 6 female presidential candidates. Unlike the male candidates, the women were asked about their fashion choices. RadioActive's Ratika Managuli talks to younger women about how they experience the pressures of dressing for success.
When Hillary Clinton ran for president in 2016, reporters always wanted to talk about her pantsuits. Not much has changed since then.
Senator Warren, everybody's excited about the debates next week. Have you picked out your outfit yet?
What female candidates wear plays a huge role in whether people think they're electable, and that judgment starts pretty young. I met with high schooler Sancha Gonzalez. She told me what she would wear for mock trial, a club where students imitate an actual trial as attorneys and witnesses.
I would always straighten my hair. Then I would do my makeup. It couldn't be too intense, but we still had to look professional by covering up our acne and dark circles. Then I would get dressed in a matching all-black pantsuit. Lastly, I would put on my heels, making sure that they weren't too high, and finally walk out the door for the day.
As president of mock trial, Sancha is experienced enough to know exactly what the jury is looking for. Follow their rubric and you won't lose points. She remembers her first scrimmage, when the jury told them why they lost.
All the women attorney were told that they should have worn pants instead of skirts because skirts make them seem more feminine and they would be more respected if they wore pants.
Pants might be the expectation for mock trial, but Hillary Clinton got criticized for her pantsuits. So what is the official rulebook? Well, there is none. But Sancha knows that either way, expectations involve dressing the part.
What you wear sends a message to people about who you are.
I reached out to Jessica Bennett. She is a New York Times editor covering gender and culture. She explained that women are often scrutinized more critically than their male counterparts.
This ranges from their records and how much experience they have to whether the public perceives them to be electable, to the way that they say things, literally their tone of voice or the pitch of their tone, to what they wear. And part of this has to do simply with the fact that we are not used to seeing, even in this day and age, women in the highest positions of power.
Until that happens, women still have to conform to an unwritten dress code, and Ambika Singh wants to help them. She has a business called Armour, an online clothing rental store with a variety to choose from.
Clothing is like part of how we present ourselves and like part of the armor and part of the first impression. In the modern era, our armor is our clothing. And so I was focused on clothing because of its relationship with how we present externally and how we present internally.
But we don't know if Elizabeth Warren got to pick her outfits because they made her feel good.
Here's my big one. Black pants, black top, and a jacket over.
We won't have a woman for president this year, but presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden promised to nominate a woman as his running mate. How will voters react to what she wears? I went back to high schooler Sancha Gonzalez. Her dream is to go into politics and possibly to work in the White House. She told me that her gender and what she wears is always in the back of her mind.
I feel like if you don't dress in a feminine way, then you're seen as too powerful or too manly or just trying to be something that you're not. And women that are wearing pantsuits or like strong colors, they're always seen as like really abrasive and really aggressive instead of just, oh, they're wearing the color red just because they like it, like how a man would be seen.
Sancha would like to think we don't get judged by what we wear, but she also realizes both men and women have internalized the messages about the way professional women should look. And given her ambitions for the future, Sancha will continue to play by the rules until those rules change. For RadioActive, this is Ratika Managuli.
Wow, nice job, Ratika. I completely relate to that, having to worry about my fashion, especially entering the business world. So thank you, Ratika, for taking on this story. For our final feature today, Celia Fergali talks body hair.
Body hair. It's taken on a new meaning in the time of coronavirus as our hair grows, and grows, and grows because our hairstylists, waxers, and threaders are unavailable to keep us looking fresh. The younger generation, ages 10 to 25, don't seem to mind. RadioActive Celia Fergali wanted to know what sets them apart.
Make no mistake, Gen Z does think about body hair. It's something my friends and I talk about a lot. Like my friend Tess.
I have a lot of thick arm hair and armpit hair and just body hair in general.
And here's Kira.
I am Fijian Indian, so I have it like on my arms pretty visibly, and my legs, and my finger knuckles.
As for me, my body hair is light brown and goldeny on my arms and dark brown on my legs. Growing up, my mom told me not to shave. She said shaving would make my hair grow back thicker and darker. I would go to track practices embarrassed when I had to wear shorts. As I got to high school, I noticed that some girls didn't remove their body hair.
For me, it's like I really don't care. Like if I randomly wear shorts to school and my legs are hairy, it's not a problem for me.
That's my friend Greta.
It's almost about what persona I feel like putting on that day. Ooh, do I feel like standing out and rocking the body hair, or do I feel like fitting into a more standard norm?
The standard norm. The one women older than us have abided by. Having no hair south of their eyebrows. But Greta and others in my generation seem to be okay with having a hairy leg day. So why are we more accepting of our body hair? I called this lady, Jess Watts. She works at a big ad agency called RPA, where she studied Gen Z for a marketing campaign. She learned that we've been encouraged all of our lives to express ourselves.
So they tend to be a lot more liberal and fluid in just how they see themselves and how they accept and see the world.
Watts even has a special name for us. She calls us identity shifters. That means we've got a really nuanced relationship with identity. She says Gen Z has a wider awareness of gender, and that it's on a spectrum.
So they are much more comfortable, I think, in terms of expressing themselves in ways that don't fit traditional gender norms, and really pushing back on entities or brands or, any type of authority figure that tries to tell them how they should act within a certain gender ideal. And that includes body hair.
Yeah, body hair. Gen Z was raised to express themselves, so they have a wider understanding of gender. Watts makes the point that the whole body hair thing is deep and cultural and decades old and filled with pressure from parents and peers, and that removing body hair is super gendered. And in her research, she learned how connected body hair and identity are.
Because body hair can be such a way to express your identity. And it can be such an outward signal to the world of your values and what you care about.
I shared this information with my friend Greta. Greta says that this makes her feel hopeful for the future.
It makes me wonder if this is a step towards, all types of body acceptance in the future, and this is, a step towards a more accepting future for everyone.
So, to those of you at home watching in dismay as your mustache grows, I humbly suggest you take a cue from my generation. Embrace the growth and don't stress the hair. For RadioActive, this is Celia Fergali.
Wow, thank you, Celia. That was an amazing story. I think a lot of us young girls can relate to being judged about body hair, but why? Let's get a behind-the-scenes look into how these stories were made. We turn it over now to Lila Shroff.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really love listening to all those stories, and I think especially right now, with so much going on in the world, these stories are tackling really important issues, and they're doing it in a way that makes me feel optimistic. There's change happening, and there's a lot of people working hard to make it happen. And so we're going to do a Q&A right now. And just a quick reminder, if you're watching, you can still submit questions for youth producers on the live chat. And so right now I'd like to invite the members of our news team onto the screen to get started with our Q&A. Hi, everybody. So what we're going to do right now is everybody's going to share either something they're really proud of in their story or something that's challenging. And we're going to start with Meghana.
Hi, I'm really excited to be a part of this listening party. And regarding my story, I think I had started knowing that I wanted to do a story about special education from the get-go in January. And then with the school closure, that became really difficult. And so something I'm both proud of and was a challenge was to try and get that story and modify it in a way that reflected the time. And I think making a story within a week rather than a month, which was our initial time frame, and publishing it and keeping track of how everything was changing so quickly with government announcements and mandates and stay-at-home orders. Everything was really, temporary, but still trying to put a story together that was meaningful and would have an impact. I think I'm really proud that I was able to get that done.
And I think you definitely did a good job of it, especially all of us were working on a different schedule and Meghana was like rushing ahead. So super impressive. What about you, Jadine?
So my story, I think as a journalist, you want to try and find out the truth about certain things. And the posts that I saw on TikTok, Instagram, they were getting millions of likes sometimes. And so many people were focusing on the wrong type of sex trafficking. And so I think I wanted to learn more about the truth because that wasn't what was being presented, at least to young people in social media. And so that was a really big challenge for me going into this story. And something that I really wanted to highlight was the voice of an actual survivor and how she got into the life or sex trafficking.
Thank you, Jadine. And now Hong.
So one of the challenges was just trying to get all sides of the story because a lot of people weren't getting back to me. Organizations didn't want to be interviewed, and that's okay. And trying to make a story that's unbiased. But I really enjoyed the challenge of doing that and just trying to research as much as I can. And a lot of time went into finding people to interview. And I really enjoyed talking to Annette Bryan and as well as the other folks that were so helpful in making me shape my story as well.
Thank you, Hong. And Ritika, what was either challenging or something you were proud of?
I think that at the beginning of the year, when we were told we had to create a 4-minute story that had to be newsy, I think everyone was really nervous. And I was really nervous because I didn't know if I'd be able to look back at something and be proud of what I made. But now I look back at it and I know that people everywhere can relate to my story. And I love that women are listening to it, telling me that they relate to it. And, I'm just so proud. And I hope that one day, women won't be judged by whether they wear pants or skirts.
And Celia?
I would say I'm most proud of my interview with Jess because it was, I don't know, it was just really fun to do. And I feel like I got a lot of good stuff out of it. And then also that I got to include a lot of people that were my age. I thought that was really cool to do.
And for me personally, I think what I'm most proud of was the opportunity to go down out into the field and really be able to meet everybody involved in everything, the people that were running the program and the girls that were involved in it. And so for me, that helped me inform the piece as a whole. And so we have a couple minutes left and we're gonna transition to some questions from the audience. And so the first question is for Jadine from Mars. And the question is, Jadine, how did you change from working on your piece, from the start up to now, and after talking to the survivor and working on the story?
So, like I mentioned before, it all started when I saw these posts and I couldn't find any real substance behind these sources or credible sources. I was sort of thinking as here's the two sides of sex trafficking on social media. But that completely shifted when I talked to a survivor, when she told me that many boys and girls who are in sex trafficking were trafficked through more covert ways of finding people who they can trust instead of the things that you see in movies or in media where somebody's going to grab you in a parking lot or they're going to literally take you and force you into the sex trafficking ring. So, yeah.
And we have another question from Lisa who says, this was all so wonderful and must have been tricky given the circumstances. And this goes for everybody. What was an unexpected skill that you had to learn or picked up to produce these stories during COVID and with the stay-at-home orders?
So for me, and I know everyone can relate to this, was recording ourselves at home, like going underneath that blanket and recording our entire script. That was definitely a unique skill I picked up. You know, we were so used to like going into a recording room and recording our own voices, and doing it at home under a blanket in a car was just a really unique experience.
Something that was really hard for me was interviewing over the phone, because normally I like nod or something to tell the person that I hear them, but like you can't talk when you're interviewing them because you need to get good audio. Yeah.
And I think I agree with Celia as well. Interviewing is difficult because you don't get the same sort of nuances of sort of body language and communication you get in person. So if you're asking tricky questions, you have to think like carefully about how you're wording things and how they fit into the conversation. And so I think we'll wrap things up with one last question for Meghana. Did you go into your story like knowing this is what you want to do, or how did COVID affect your plans for your story?
Yeah, I briefly mentioned this earlier, but since January, I wanted to do a story about special education because I don't think it's a topic that's covered enough in the news, and we don't really hear the voices of people who are affected. And so my idea was to do a profile of a special education student initially. But once COVID hit and we're at home, it was really, really hard to coordinate to get in touch with the student, and do an interview over the phone would have been very difficult. So I ended up interviewing a special education teacher. And I think we still did justice to the story, but I think I'm gonna follow up soon.
Well, thank you to everyone on the news team. It's really been an unforgettable spring. And now we're gonna throw things back to Morgan and Issei.
Something new we tried in this workshop was making videos on TikTok. We wanted to share some of our favorite moments from these videos from you. You can follow us on TikTok at KUOW RadioActive.
It's Corona time. Hey, it's Corona time right now. It's Corona time.
We're figuring this out. Figuring this out. Okay, Charlotte composed.
A little bit of Erica by my side. A little bit of Rita's all I need.
I'm gonna fall off my chair.
Am I doing it right?
No.
The other way.
No, you are doing, no, the other way was fine. You just have a really long heart. No, Lucas, Lucas, it's the other way.
To do it.
Lucas, you go this way, okay? This way. Get out of, okay.
The other way?
This is our heart.
Wait, we tried making a heart and it went like...
While the news team worked on those feature stories we just listened to, we were busy making podcasts. Whew, so many Zoom calls working on this script.
Oh man, let's listen to what we made.
The first podcast we'll listen to is about education in the greater Seattle area during COVID-19, produced by me, Mimi Zacharias, and Charlotte Ingroff.
Hey Mimi, how have you been?
What's up, Issei? I feel so tired and low energy because quarantine, it really sucks, bro. But what about you?
Yeah, I feel that. I scroll through TikTok for distraction, but I can't even escape there anymore.
Your brother got the results.
He has it, doesn't he?
He has it. He tested positive for coronavirus. COVID-19.
Coronavirus.
Coronavirus.
The coronavirus.
It's Corona time.
Coronavirus.
Coronavirus.
That's so crazy. I hate TikTok for that. But I feel like coronavirus is affecting like every single aspect of our lives right now. Like for me, I'm super sad about not having my senior spring. It was supposed to be my last 3 months of high school to just chill and celebrate after a rough 4 years.
Yeah, my junior year has been really weird to adjust to. SATs have been canceled, and it makes me wonder if this hurts my chances of getting into the colleges I want.
Whoa, that's rough. Junior year is already so stressful as it is. And even for like other students too, the biggest way we're being impacted is through school closures. Everything from like SATs to graduations are just being canceled.
On this episode of the RadioActive podcast, we're diving into how the coronavirus pandemic has disrupted education and how the virus has highlighted school funding inequities that have existed for decades. In this day and age, there's a lot of uncertainty for students. We wonder when school will start again, if we will walk in our graduation, and what will happen to the rest of our education. We asked students in the Seattle area about their experiences, concerns, and questions during this pandemic.
As an extroverted person, it has made me anxious. Not having the ability to socialize or have physical interaction has caused me to feel alone and thus causing this anxiousness.
I fear that as students lose motivation, they won't want to learn as much, and then that will kind of inevitably change the entire learning experience overall. All juniors are in the same boat. None of us know what's going to happen in the future, and that none of us are really alone.
I especially felt very sad when, I saw that email where they said that there won't be any graduation because of the pandemic, because it was almost as if my dream of, being able to walk and get my diploma and, my family gets to see me, make this achievement is taken away from me.
You just heard from Washington State High School students, Michelle Rogers, Eden Voss, and Marian Muhammad.
This is such a stressful time, and I feel for every student right now. But I can especially relate to Marian, because I really want to walk across the stage and physically get my diploma. Like, really bad, bro. Like, I've been imagining that moment since, last spring.
And it's important to remember that this pandemic is affecting each student differently. Some students are able to continue online classes, but there are other students who can't because they don't have access to a computer or the internet, and it all ties back to school funding.
Yeah, that's exactly why when the pandemic hit in Washington State and the officials closed the schools for 2 weeks, they decided no district was allowed to offer remote learning. And the reason was equity. They knew some students wouldn't have access to the internet and or computers during those 2 weeks. And not every school and district has the funding to provide students with the materials they need to continue online learning. But then, Governor Jay Inslee closed schools for the rest of the year, and that's way too long to not offer any type of schooling for students. So now, state officials have decided to require all districts to offer some type of remote learning. But funding inequities are still preventing many students from having resources they need to continue their learning.
All of this had made things pretty unpredictable. State officials' indecisiveness has made students really anxious about the future of their education, and it's made school funding inequities even more obvious. So we talked to 2 students from the Seattle area about how all of this has affected them.
First, we talked to Paul Noon, who's a junior at Mercer Island High School, a public high school in a wealthy area where only about 3% of the students come from low-income households. And Paul says the switch to online classes hasn't been too bad for him. He still gets up at 8 in the morning to go to class, and he still sees his classmates pretty much every day.
Today, the classes weren't that long. It was a good day. It's tiring being on Zoom calls and not seeing people's actual faces and hearing their actual voice, but it's just like a picture on a screen and a recording almost. It's just not as engaging.
I can totally relate to Paul. While I'm grateful I can continue my learning, I'm still really sad I can't see people in person, and it's really hard to stay focused sometimes.
But here's the thing. Not everyone has the privilege of having Zoom classes and a routine every day. Next, we hear from Kitsap, who's a junior at Rainier Beach High School. Rainier Beach is a public school where roughly 72% of students come from low-income households. Remember, Paul's school only has 3%. Kadist hasn't been able to continue all her classes over Zoom.
My classes aren't really necessarily like classes, if that makes sense. Like assignments from our classes are posted on Schoology, and then we just complete it and submit it. But only for some of our classes, our teachers offering, Zoom calls as a class or emotional support. But it's usually just as an option because obviously not everyone has internet or Wi-Fi access. It really just feels weird and difficult because there's no longer really any structure in a lot of our lives, which, school gave us for pretty much most of us our entire lives. And it's also just hard to be productive because it's difficult to find quiet places to do schoolwork in. And there's just so many distractions as well with our phones and whatnot.
In fact, some of Kadist's friends call her for updates because they might not have their own Wi-Fi.
Well, I've had, friends call me asking me for updates, and, assignments, asking me if I can run them through these assignments to the best of my ability so that they don't miss out on too much, and can be prepared for college and, high school graduation.
So, Mimi, let's actually talk about why Paul and Kadist's experiences are so different.
Well, remember, Issei, around 72% of the students at Rainier Beach come from low-income households. So there are probably a lot of students who need equipment from their schools to continue their learning online. While at Mercer Island, only about 3% of students come from low-income households. So the majority of the students probably don't need much equipment from school to continue their online learning. However, because of the ways that schools are funded, Mercer Island has enough money so that they could provide laptops and hotspots for the students in need if they needed to, while Rainier Beach does not.
But doesn't Rainier Beach have a way higher percentage of students of color than Mercer Island? I read recently that Rainier Beach is 97% students of color, predominantly Black, while Mercer Island High School is 70% white students. How does this play a factor in funding inequities?
Well, it's important to know that funding inequities contribute a whole lot to the achievement gap between Black and white students. Predominantly POC and Black schools, like Rainier Beach, that need extra funding and support aren't getting it, while predominantly white schools, like Mercer Island, are. And the students who need the most support aren't getting it because of these lack of resources. And so achievement gaps continue to exist.
Okay, that makes sense. I recognize that Mercer Island has the funding that they need to afford those resources. But where would Rainier Beach get that extra funding for materials like hotspots and laptops?
Okay, so the funding category is called MSOC, Materials, Supplies, and Operating Costs. And the money comes from the state. But that isn't always enough for a school or a district. So extra money for materials and technology can come from local funds, like local levies, and sometimes even PTSAs.
PTSA stands for Parent Teachers Student Association, right?
Yeah, they're parent fundraising groups for individual schools, and wealthier parents means more money for a school. And get this, Mercer Island was able to raise $64,000 from PTSA funding in 2018, while Rainier Beach raised $0. Rainier Beach's PTSA does work hard, but the school just doesn't have wealthy parents to donate to it like Mercer Island does. And for all schools, but especially for a school like Rainier Beach that can't rely on PTSA funds for extra support, money from tax levies is necessary.
And what exactly is a local levy?
So, local levies are like property taxes at the district level. Since Mercer Island has high property values, the Mercer Island School District is able to raise a lot of money through these levies. But Seattle has lower property values, so Seattle Public Schools doesn't bring in as much money through these levies. Seattle is also a much bigger district, so it would need a lot more to be able to distribute this money equitably. And all of this makes it so that if Mercer Island needed extra money for supplies for its students in need during this time, it would have it, while Rainier Beach wouldn't.
So I'm still stuck on the fact that Mercer Island was able to raise $64,000 from just PTA funding, but Rainier Beach didn't even raise a dime. That is absurd to me.
No, it's actually so crazy. And these inequities aren't a new topic for Kadist. The student from Rainier Beach we heard from earlier, she and 4 other students founded an organization called Black and Brown Minds Matter to help raise awareness about school funding inequities and how they affect Rainier Beach along with other underfunded schools. And we had the chance to ask her about how this current pandemic is affecting her community.
When you look at the stats, you'll see how many students at Beach come from low-income backgrounds, how many are homeless, how many don't have access to Wi-Fi, and see that Rainier Beach High School, already lacks the adequate funding from the state and district to support students. And because of that, that will set us back even farther. And the achievement gap will really only widen, not even locally, but on a national and even global level.
We also asked her what the district could have done to better support their students.
Had they taken action from the get-go and created an action plan for students, teachers, and families for any potential possibilities, including online learning, a lot more could have been avoided, especially this tough transition that a lot of us are going through.
It's not like students didn't need this kind of technology last year. If students were provided with laptops and hotspots before this crisis, I feel like things would be a little different. But since they weren't, we asked Kadis what she thinks the district can still do to best support all of its students.
Unless you are in the position of marginalized communities, no amount of reading, books, no amount of doing research really is going to help you understand. And that's why, the ones being oppressed, the ones who are the ones being vulnerable, they're the ones who should be at the forefront of the decision making. They're the ones who should have, the say in the decisions that are ultimately going to affect us.
So Kadis says that students should be heard and included in conversations when school officials make decisions. But she doesn't mean that the burden of reforming education should fall on our shoulders.
And I mean, as extraordinary as this is as well, we also have to understand that the youth are really under immense pressure as it is, especially now. And it really shouldn't be us carrying the burden of creating solutions. Unfortunately, this is really just another example of the adultifying of Black and brown children and making them, by making them responsible for what should have been adult jobs, from the get-go.
Whoa, the adultification of Black and brown students, that's something that's really important to think about.
Exactly. Kadis brought up a really important issue regarding systemic racism. Black and brown students are already at a disadvantage because of how the education system is built, and then they are asked to take on even more responsibilities.
Yeah, and while it's important for the students to voice their needs, they shouldn't have to constantly fight to be heard. They shouldn't be responsible for solving a district's problems either. Districts need to put a lot more effort to listen, understand, and accommodate to different students' needs.
Right. We need a healthier relationship between students and district leaders. Students should advocate for what we need, and the district should figure out how to respond to those needs, pandemic or no pandemic.
So we know the coronavirus is highlighting funding inequities, but the pandemic is also going to have long-term effects on the achievement gaps that already exist between students. To learn more, we talked to Julia Worth, who is the Director of Policy and Research at the League of Education Voters. Lately, her work has been helping students and families get access to the tools they need to ensure learning is still happening. And she talked to us about how there's a lot of work ahead, even after schools reopen.
In the long term, we need to keep asking these questions, right, about what has the impact of this been on students of color? Did they have the same access to learning resources as white students in this time of crisis? And making sure that when schools reopen, we have the resources and the tools to support students and catch students up. Because there is certainly the potential for students to lose learning being out of school for this long.
So regardless if there's a crisis or not, school districts should provide accommodations and resources for their students to succeed. And this pandemic can be a good time to make change in our education system. Julia says right now is a great time to reach out to your elected officials, from state representatives to school board members.
Ultimately, they're the ones making the decisions about where money is going, which schools are getting what resources. And we need to make sure that they are hearing from students who are most impacted by these decisions, right? And who might not have access to the counselor or the nurse that they need in their school, or don't have access to the Wi-Fi hotspot through their PTA. So I would say those are kind of concrete things you can do even right now.
The most vulnerable students are going to lose learning as a result of this pandemic. So while districts are working to supply materials for students right now, it's also important for us, like Julia said, to reach out to elected officials on what changes need to be made when our schools reopen.
We all recognize that there's some pretty big disparities between schools that aren't funded equally. But now what? How easy is it to change how the educational system works? This has all made me realize that the issue is much more complex than I thought, and there isn't a simple solution.
Yeah, that is why it's so hard, because it's not just one or two things that need to be changed, it's the whole system. And I think that it's really important for everyone to start prioritizing advocating for funding equity, because if students everywhere came together and advocated for equity in education, we can make actual change. Because again, it shouldn't be only on the kids who are already at a disadvantage to be the only ones advocating for change. It should be on everyone. So this is a time to do our research, understand funding inequities, and talk to our elected officials.
These inequities in education have been around for a minute, but I think Julia's right. Now could be a time to make major changes. The system is broken. Maybe it takes a pandemic to actually do something about it. And that's a wrap on our episode. Thank you to everyone who we heard from today. Paul Noon, Kitsap, and Julia Worth. You can follow the Instagram account for Black and Brown Minds Matter at black.brown.minds.matter to keep up with what the organization is doing.
And you can visit the League of Education Voters website to learn more about education inequities and stay informed on education bills.
We would also like to thank all of our Vox Pops participants, Marianne Mohammed, Eden Voss, and Michelle Rogers.
And special thanks to our executive producer, Charlotte Ingrove, our fabulous podcast mentor, Mary Heisey, and our amazing editor, Kelsey Kupfer.
If you want to hear more from us and our fellow RadioActivians, subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or find us at KUOW.
If you want more updates, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok with the handle RadioActive Youth Media.
Signing off, it's your girl, Issei Palos.
And Mimi Zacharias. Bye.
Wow, Issei, you guys did amazing work. That is such important radio journalism. The last podcast we'll listen to is a fictional piece about cowboys, produced by Joshua Fernandez, me, Morgan White, Lucas Galarno, with support from Zahira Ali.
You're listening to a podcast from KUOW's RadioActive Youth Media. This is a fictional podcast. Any relation to real people is purely coincidental.
Cowboys. As American as the phrase, as American as apple pie. Big standoffs, big guns, and even bigger personalities. Clint Eastwood, John Wayne, Henry Fonda. The icons of a bygone era. However, not everyone is so willing to let go of that bygone time. In a tiny town in Washington lives a man who believes he belongs in that list of icons. He doesn't receive the fame, the fortune, or the recognition, but he's a true blue cowboy. You may not know his name, but you wouldn't be alone. My name is Elise Cresswell. You haven't heard of me yet, but I've got one heck of an exciting story for y'all today. I'm sure you'll hear much more about me when this goes viral. It's okay. You can say you knew me before I was famous. We've recently heard tales of this elusive cowboy from some folks on Twitter. I'm on my way to interview some of them now to find out what these townsfolk think of their new neighborhood legend. First, we have an interview with Jesse Elwood. All right, Jesse, what do you know about this cowboy?
Well, I've seen him around a few times. He stands out, you know, but I've never talked to him. Without all the gear, he looks pretty average. I guess he's in his 20s. He's real dressed up, though. He's always wearing the cowboy hat and boots. You know, the whole get-up. He walks around like he owns the place. I don't know what he thinks he's doing. I saw him try to lasso a crow, but he missed by a lot. He basically just threw some rope on the ground. What's even the point of lassoing a crow? That's just how you get attacked by birds.
Okay, I think that's enough. Thank you for your help, Jesse. Now, I'm here with Lena Ward, another resident of the town where this so-called cowboy lives.
The cowboy? Yeah, I've talked to him a few times. He always wears this red bandana around his face, and when I ask him about it, he says it was to keep out the dust. I tried to tell him there's no risk of dust storms here, but he just walked off without saying a word. He's so rude.
I don't know about you folks, but I've certainly never seen a dust storm in this part of Washington. This guy is shaping up to be a real interesting character. Next, we have Jeremy Parish. He had a few thoughts on the town's cowboy.
Oh my God, that guy is so weird. The other day I was waiting for the bus, and right as my bus was pulling up, he rolls by in his car, and he calls out through the windows. He's all like, "Howdy, sir. Looks to me like you're in need of a ride." And I was like, "No, I'm fine. My bus is here, so..." And as I got on the bus, I heard him talking to his car, saying things like, "Not today, oh girl." All right, I know the accent is bad, but it's bad when he does it too.
Lastly, I'm talking to Iris Lane. All right, what's your opinion of the cowboy?
Yeah, he makes me kind of uncomfortable. Like one time he offered to escort me to work in the morning and he was like, "A dame like yourself shouldn't be walking these dangerous streets alone," even though it was 9 a.m. in a really nice part of town. I don't know what era he thinks he's in, but that really isn't how you treat people in the real world.
Do you know where I could find him?
No, he won't tell anyone his name. If you stand outside for long enough, you'll probably run into him. If you don't mind me asking, why are you here? There doesn't seem to be much of a story.
I'm a reporter. When you're in the business, anything's a story.
So do you work for NPR or something?
It seems the residents have some strong opinions about their local Western hero. However, secondhand sources can only carry a story so far. I had to hear it from the man himself. Lucky enough, I had a fateful encounter outside the corner store. Is that... Hey!
Hush now. Not here. Tell me and Sally. Don't say a word.
I tailed him and Sally, a 2004 Subaru Outback with a horse head mounted to the front, all the way to the tiniest pawn shop I had ever seen, tastefully sandwiched between an auto shop and another, larger auto shop. Somehow it was even smaller inside. Wow, this is quite the place you got here.
So you're the two-bit gumshoes been trying to get a look-see at my barking irons, huh? You got a name, big shot?
Yes, I'm Elise Cresswell, and I was hoping to ask you a few questions.
Well, I know you big city types love your efficiency, so let me put this in a language you understand. Ain't got nothing to say to you or your little gizmo. I'm far too busy tending my shop and protecting the kind townsfolk and paying customers. Round here, Lord knows they need it.
There's no one else here. Never mind. Can I have your full name?
Don't got a name? Don't need one. My name is whatever the townsfolk need it to be.
I do need to know your name for the story. But you know what? We can worry about that later. So you're the owner of this store. Does anyone else work here?
I am indeed the sole proprietor of this once prideful institution.
I see. It looks like you sell a lot of cowboy merchandise. How did you get into this hobby?
My wares are the finest in town. These here boots were worn by James Piccadilly Shortstroke. Look here, there's still blood on the spurs from when he single-handedly fought a bear out in eastern Kansas. This here film documents the adventures of Lloyd Two Lives Patterson, who famously rose from the dead after taking a whole 8-shot cylinder straight to the chest. This is a first edition printing, which actually fetches quite the pretty penny nowadays. Oh, and if you look here, it's actually signed by the man himself. How cool is that?
Yes. Very interesting. But I want to know about you.
You city folk are always wanting. Life is a whole lot better if you just stop every now and then to graze.
That's the whole point of an interview, right? How about we start over? What inspired you to start this cowboy act?
You're all down but none. Now little Angelica being a cowboy ain't an act. It's a way of life. It's all the caboose. Do you remember when you was born? Exactly. How am I supposed to remember when I started down this owl hoot trail? I know you're banded for information. That's just your lot in life. But what can I tell you? This lifestyle comes as naturally as breathing. I don't know anything else.
Okay. But there had to be a time when you first felt this calling. Can you tell me about that?
All right, since you're just chomping at the bit to know, I'll tell you. My memory's not what it used to be. I'm getting to be quite the old pod. It was Eastern Washington in the year 1999. I was just a youngin', didn't know nothing about the world, but the world didn't know nothing about me, so we called it even. The shop was as quiet as death itself. The pitter-patter of my tiny feet boomed across the store. The merchandise of my heroes glared down at me in the darkness, their polished faces just barely catching the moonlight. My mama was supposed to come back that night for our weekly movie night. Half the time she'd watch the movie, the other half she'd watch my little face light up when the good guys won. My mama loved cowboys. Something about the high adventure called to her, like a wolf calls to the moon. She built this little shop up with her sweat and tears. My mom was the truest cowpoke I ever did know.
And then she didn't come back. Must have been bandits. Them raiders must have gotten to her. She wouldn't just leave me here. I waited all night for her to come back. Just me and those cowboys, soaking in the pale moonlight. The sheriff never did find her. When the sun finally broke through the windows of the store, the faces of my idols lit up and illuminated my life's purpose. These folks are in need of a cowboy they're dreadfully own, and lucky for them, I'm just the guy for the job. It's tough work, sure, but it's gotta be done. To make sure what happens to my mom never happens to anyone ever again. These folks need me.
He claims to protect the town, but what is he really protecting? Protecting the small child inside of him who still believes his mother didn't abandon him. Protecting the illusion that he's helping these people, that he's saving them from the bandits of this tiny Washington suburb, which hasn't seen a violent crime in over a decade. But I'm a reporter, so I fulfilled my sacred duty as a reporter to tell the truth. Could you elaborate on that?
You heard me. These folks would be up a goddamn creek choked to the britches in their own blood without me.
I'm sorry, but I don't think the townsfolk see it in the same way. Here, listen.
He always walks around asking people if they need help. No one ever does, at least not from him. But he keeps insisting he can help them. He saw me walking with groceries, and he said he'd help me carry them home. We were like 2 doors down from my house, and I really didn't need his help. But he just grabbed one anyways and walked the 6 feet there. Then he started going on about how grateful I must be that he came along. Like, sorry, I'm not particularly interested in helping your ego trip.
Well, that's just one unsatisfied customer in the world's busiest burger chain.
I'm pretty sure cowboys didn't have fast food.
I meant that's just one unsavory feller at the world's largest Texas barbecue.
How can it be the world's largest if it's only in Texas?
I meant Texas style. It's a figure of speech. Golly, you big city folks sure do take everything literally. Point is, there are plenty of people here who do appreciate my work.
All of my interviews are like this. Want me to play you another? And I did. Another after that, and another after that. He listened to every single one of those interviews front to back, absorbing every single criticism with a surprisingly thoughtful silence. When everything was done, he took a moment before excusing himself to the back of the shop. I waited for 14 minutes before he emerged. Are you okay? You were in there a long time and your face is totally wet.
Cowboys don't cry. Can't just stay here with folks who don't respect my work. I'll take old Sally out and find a new town, even if I have to ride across the whole country. I know I'll find it. That's the way of the cowboy.
You're just going on a road trip until you find what? Your purpose?
Now, this ain't a road trip, you see. No time for sightseeing. You never know what raiders could be lurking in the dark. You just gotta keep riding.
In that moment, I saw something. His perseverance, his commitment, his sheer determination to maintain his ideals. In a way, it was admirable. How deeply rooted his beliefs were. But why? Why maintain the charade at the cost of everything else? There had to be something deeper. And that something told me I needed to see it through. So, when do we leave?
When did I say you were coming? Nah, I gotta walk alone. No other way to do it.
I'll make this worth your time. I can tell your story to the world.
You? Please, you take me for some kind of hick? I done my research, Mrs. Cresswell. You're a nobody. Blog page and a YouTube. Barely 100 hits between them.
Well,
Every episode pathetically begging an audience of no one to continue the conversation in the comments, when you've never even gotten a single one.
Listen, I'm taking the biggest risk of my career on you. We're both just people with nothing left to lose. Please, just give me a shot.
I could use an extra hand to pitch camp at night and an extra ear to hear my story. Fine. Suppose you're right, partner. Meet me here at sunup. I ain't going back for any lost knickknacks, so you better be ready to move whenever I say. That clear?
Yes, sir. See you at sunup.
They say nature documentaries are some of the most difficult films to shoot, following fascinating creatures to the ends of the earth and braving the most extreme conditions to discover some of nature's most inexplicable and noble rarities. I like to think that by braving these mild conditions of shame and embarrassment, in my own way, I can uncover something truly unexpectedly respectable. Until next time, I'm Elise Cresswell.
Next time. Sunny Idaho.
He's not who he says he is.
I let you into my car and drive you around, and this is the thanks I get?
This could ruin everything.
Mom? Thank you for listening to our podcast. This podcast was produced by Josh Fernandez, Morgan White, and Lucas Galierno. This was a production of RadioActive Youth Media, a program of KUOW Public Radio, where young people make radio. Follow us on social media at KUOW Radioactive. Subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Find out more about Radioactive at kuow.org/radioactive. Special thanks to our mentor, Kendra Hanna, and help from all of our voice actors, Charlotte Engrav, Kyle Norris, Jim Packwood, and Lisa White.
Wow, that was really something. Great job there for making that really cool piece about cowboys. So that's a wrap on all of our podcasts. Let's talk to the producers to hear how these were made.
Thanks, Issei. And so we are going to talk to the podcast producers and do the same sort of Q&A that we did with the news producers earlier on. So just a reminder, you can continue to submit your questions in the live chat, and we'll get to those soon. And just a quick little reflection on those. I think they're two really different podcasts, but they kind of complement each other really nicely. And that the first one really broke down like the details of what's happening in terms of educational inequities, and did so in a way that I think was so well researched and much more extensive than a lot of things I've seen. And then the second podcast on cowboys provided a really nice like escape from reality and let you get lost in that world and really follow the story with a lot of creativity. So amazing job. And if the podcast producers want to come on to the stage right now and start answering some questions, we're going to start off with the education podcast. And so we're going to start off with Charlotte. If you'd like to share either something you're really proud of or something that was challenging in producing this.
I think that it's sort of both something that I'm proud of, that like we overcame a challenge that we overcame that I was proud of, where we had sort of a hard time like shifting from like before coronavirus hit to afterwards, and like we were sort of set on doing something about school, but it was hard to sort of keep that focus. And I'm just so proud that we were able to make it work and turn the story into something I think that was like really meaningful and had a really important focus. So I'm just really proud of that.
And Issei, why did you choose to focus on education in the first place?
Well, for all three of us, we are students, but who went to different kinds of schooling, like education. Like for me, I do Running Start, there's independent schools, there's private schools. And we had days of conversation where we would talk about our different experiences and how irritating something could be when we are not heard, especially students who deserve to have a voice and the policies are being affected for us. So when we took a step back and we looked at all the brainstorming, we realized that we needed to analyze why these funding inequities existed. And it was so important for all students, parents, legislators, anyone to actually listen to a student's perspective on how this affects us and how important it is to analyze something that is so prevalent. Yeah.
I really appreciated the balance and sort of how accessible you made the podcast. Like, I felt like I didn't have to have a lot of background knowledge and could understand what you were talking about, but it also didn't feel like you were talking down or trying to oversimplify, like you're providing all the information. So that's a hard balance and really impressive. And Mimi, if you could just tell us about that sort of shift, like where your idea started and how you transitioned as you kept education as your main topic.
Yeah, so we knew we wanted to like focus on education, and like within education, I know we were like, some of us want to do like school lunches, and some of us want to like funding, and I feel like funding was like always kind of at the center of like center focus, because it was like all of these inequities are because of these schools being underfunded. And I feel like with everything happening with like school closures, and like just I remembered like I took a workshop on like how schools are funded, and how like materials and supplies and operating costs, like how money for that is like allocated and stuff. And I remember like obviously schools are underfunded are going to have a lot harder time providing their students with the materials they need and stuff. So we kind of like, I don't know, it wasn't that hard of a transition, because we already knew we wanted to focus on funding inequities. And then with the current pandemic, we're like, well, these funding inequities are being like heightened and highlighted by this pandemic. So this is something we can focus on. Yeah.
Thank you. And we're going to transition really quickly here to the Cowboy podcast and ask them a couple questions. So if we could just start off, Morgan, what was one thing that was challenging or something you're proud of? The classic question we've been asking.
I think it was voicing, especially at home. Usually we have the ability to voice in person. It helps with quality a lot, and finding a lot of people who may not be used to producing radio or quality audio. Like my friend in Florida, Jim Packwood, has an amazing voice, and he recorded his Jesse audio on his iPhone. I think it might have been an iPhone 5. And it just sounded so good. And I was like nervous because there's just a lot of worry about quality, and I'm proud of how that turned out, although the circumstances did make it a little uneasy, but yeah.
And then Josh, how did the process of creating a fictional piece sort of differ from your typical RadioActive podcast feature producing experience? And then adding on to that, why cowboys?
We initially had a little bit of trouble coming up with a solid foundation for an idea. We threw out a lot of things, but one idea that seemed to stick was the idea of like making a fictional podcast about cowboys in some capacity. Back then, we didn't know whether it'd be like an actual like true Wild Wild West story, or if it would be like something more modern. We ended up going more modern because I kind of feel that my phony cowboy accent fit like a phony cowboy better than like a real cowboy. But we sort of came to the idea of cowboys just because I threw out the idea of like radio dramas for like clever audio design. We were sort of toying around with things that would work well to your ear, and audio dramas like from the 50s where they had like big cowboy standoffs and all that. I thought that would be neat to try and replicate that a little bit.
That's great. In fact, one of our questions was actually if you had listened to some of those old radio westerns prior, and it sounds like that's a yes. That's awesome. So we'll do a couple quick audience questions. The first one for the education group, and I think you guys kind of covered this, but we'll just revisit it a little bit, is, you know, you covered so much ground. What drew you specifically towards school funding?
I feel like me and Issei kind of both said, but like school funding is like, that's one of the main ways or reasons there is so much inequity in the education system. And like when we were having conversations, I know like a lot of us had like different experiences because we all went to like either different districts, or like me and Charlotte go to independent schools, but I've been at a public school in like a district in North Seattle. But like, so I've never really experienced like going to underfunded school, because like my elementary school, middle school had like pretty good PTAs, and like hearing from the students at Rainier Beach and just like throughout high school, I've learned more about like how like their like fight for funding equity. And like I know throughout this year, KIDIS and like the Black and Brown Minds Matter, like the organization had like student walkouts and protests like for funding equity. And I feel like that was just like something that was like really important and relevant right now. And like a lot of people can't really, a lot of people in my life can't relate to, because we go to schools in like predominantly, I guess, like wealthier areas or private schools.
Yeah, I think I'm a student at Mercer Island High School, which is the other school you talked about in your podcast. And for me, being able to hear it spelled out like that really opened my eyes. So thank you. And then last question for the Cowboy podcast. Two questions, I guess. One, who wrote the script? And two, how did you come up with that dialogue? Because that can't be easy to make it sound natural and engaging and flow like conversation. So share a little bit of that process.
I sort of divided the script, or we sort of divided the script in half. The person who wrote the first half of the script was someone who left the project early due to like just being too busy. But he wrote sort of the first half, and I wrote the second half with a lot of the cowboy dialogue. And I had a lot of fun with that, looking at old Wild West like dictionaries and sort of stuff like that. Like I researched a lot of slang, and I just tried to include as much as I could. I found a really handy translator app that translates like normal speech into cowboy speech. Yeah, I just sort of looked at a lot of different like Old West slang dictionaries.
That's awesome. So thank you, everybody. We are now, so thank you for listening to our Stories and Podcast. We're now going to transition to our closing section of today's event with RadioActive's program producer, Mary Heisey.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, like Lila said, and by the way, thank you, Lila. My name is Mary Heisey. I'm a program producer at RadioActive, and I'm also the program lead. And I just want to give a big thank you to our MCs, Issei Palos, Morgan White, and Lila Schroff, who did an amazing job today. And I also want to thank our mentors, Sonia Harris, Kyle Norris, and Kendra Hanna. These talented journalists and producers helped students throughout production and showed so much grace and steadiness throughout the program. So thank you. Huge thank you to Kelsey Kupfer and Melissa Takai, who put so much heart and work into making this party happen. I think it's safe to say we did it. And thank you for coming and listening to these stories. Before we really close things out, I wanted to share the results of a friendly competition called Radio Race, where youth competed in groups to see who could listen to the most audio, radio stories, podcasts during the program. And here are the results. All right, so we had a collective 6,619 minutes of listening. That is 110 hours, which is like watching 28 Super Bowls or one director's cut of Lord of the Rings. Just kidding. I really love looking at this top list of podcasts. We have The Daily, Today Explained, TED Radio Hour, and Joe Exotic Tiger King, which is just a beautiful, healthy variety of listening habits represented. Hi, Jadine. So without further ado, I will announce the winning group. Da, 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 da. Lila, Meghana, Ritika. These three did the most listening. They clocked in over 1,800 minutes of listening. And you all get prizes. Nicely done. And I also have to shout out two individuals who individually logged over 1,000 minutes of listening, Hong Ta and Morgan White. So yeah, Hong and Morgan, you two will get prizes as well. Congratulations and thanks for playing, everyone. So now I would like to invite the youth to come on stage so you can turn on your videos. Just keep yourself muted for now. Hi, everyone. So good to see you. And while they're joining me, I just want to say that, cute. I just want to say that these young producers have given me so much to look forward to. The signs are so lovely. Thank you so much. And to our Radioactivians, you all have accomplished something remarkable. You followed your curiosity, you spoke truth to power, you prioritized youth voice, you saw problems in the world and found stories that offered creative solutions. Like you said, you did interviews over the phone, wrote scripts, and had so many edit meetings over Zoom. You recorded narration in closets and under blankets. And you did all of that with the best attitude, even through the uncertainty, the fear, the pain, the grief, through a pandemic, right? And to our graduating seniors, we will miss you so much. Congratulations, you did it, and we can't wait to see what's next. Whew. All right. Well, you have officially finished the Radioactive Advanced Producers Workshop. You can go on to do wonders with the skills you've learned. And I'm going to invite you all to unmute yourselves, grab your party poppers, and here's to a great workshop. So I'll count us down and then you can blast off, okay?
And really fast, we just want to say thank you to the Radioactive staff. If you can see our backgrounds here, for creating such a welcoming space throughout this workshop, and even through the transitions and difficulties, we really, really appreciate having had the opportunity to continue all of this work. So thank you.
Aw, thank you all. This is so sweet. Okay. Have your party poppers? All right. 3, 2, 1. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for watching. Bye.